status. I didn't know about this. Okay, here we go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our technical workshop on testing and deployment in the Asia-Pacific region. My name's Paul Sakamoto. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Savari, Inc., and I'll be your moderator for this evening's panel session, where we have assembled some excellent panelists who are going to be able to brief you on their experience in getting certification done in their regions. So we'll start out with our agenda. Next slide, please. Each panelist will give a 5-minute piece on their area and an introduction of their company and themselves, and then we'll have the panel session and wherein I'll ask some questions of the different panelists, and we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end, time permitting. Okay, next slide, please. So just a couple thoughts are, the core functions of V2X around the world are similar. But, as we all know, in certification and test, similar doesn't cut it. Similar is not exact. And there's localization in each of the major markets. I think we're familiar with some of those different pieces. Some of the examples are security schemes. Sometimes the certificate scheme is a little bit different. The distribution schemes are certainly different. There's application parameters because of the different environments they're in, whether it's what side of the road you're driving on or the distances involved and the speeds, etc. Each body has a different set of parameters that they're trying to certify to. There's also differences in message handling, congestion protocol, etc. And some of these things are easily tested, some of them not so much. Also, the level of validation required for these different elements is sometimes different. We think about this, and I know in a lot of my jobs in the past, I used to be in semiconductor test as well as now involved in test in V2X. And a lot of the executives and business people always think of it as being expensive. Test is expensive. Why are we doing this? We're essentially deleting things and failing them. And the fact is, it's not as expensive as failing, especially when it comes down to deployment. So when we think about deployment and actually putting devices on poles, putting them in cars, if you have to take that back, I think we all know it's very expensive. And in fact, in some examples here in the United States where I'm based, the cost of deploying a RSU, a roadside unit, for instance, is actually usually several times the cost of actually purchasing the unit in the first place. So it's a very expensive sort of thing to fail in a deployment because we didn't do proper test and validation. That's why it's typically gated. Deployment is typically gated by testing. And another change item that I wrote down here is the fact that each region has a different approach to test and deployment. For instance, is it gated by local authorities, government, national? In the US, a lot of it's been driven by the commercial sector is actually driving some of the early deployment in cars. So we'll explore some of that too. So today, we're going to focus on the Asian region. We have some excellent panelists here, each of which will introduce themselves as they come out. And the first one will be Charlie Cheng, who is the Business Development Manager of iSmartways Technology Incorporated. So each panelist will give their 5-minute sort of overview of the challenges in the Asia-Pacific region. And then we'll go into the panel session. So Charlie, why don't you lead us off, please? I am not hearing Charlie. Is anyone else there?
Yeah, Charlie, I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Hi, can you hear me now?
Okay. Yes.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Charlie Cheng. I'm muted. I'm the Business Development Manager. Thank you, Paul, for the introduction. Thank you also for everybody for the opportunity, especially to Omniair and the the directors and the leadership. Like I said before when I was muted, my name is Charlie Cheng. I am the Business Development Manager. I'm based in Detroit, Michigan. Our company was founded in 2014, and this is the backdrop of our active Aurora deployment out in Alberta, Canada. And you see our company's mission is to make transportation safer, smarter, and more enjoyable. Next slide, please. So a little bit of background on myself. I worked alongside tier ones and OEMs in the automotive space for a couple years now. I worked also alongside government doing some international trade and development. And I ran into our CEO and co-founder, Dr. Tony Chu, who has been known in some of the V2X community, as well as his PhD and doctorate in UC Berkeley, as well as University of Wisconsin, and then currently where he is a professor at University of Alberta. And he began around 2008 when a lot of this technology started, and you'll see that in 2014, alongside of what follows alongside the industry and the policy, for both reasons, for China and the U.S., you see our company products and solutions have followed those developments as well. Next slide, please. I'll try to be brief. This is a political cartoon. I think this is especially relevant now. I think the two sides have never been so polarized before, since the 1980s when really Nixon went to China. But it is very much, an arm wrestle between the two right now, especially in the media. But in terms of technology, I see this as a game, as a match, right? It's not necessarily a war, but more so just a friendly competition to see which technology and which cities can deploy these solutions in a reasonably and safe manner, right? Next slide, please. And so I kind of briefly outlined, the differences between what I call the Wild West, obviously the U.S., very fitting for Plugfest being in Texas, and what I would say the Chinese side. And what I've highlighted in the middle is what you see is kind of the similarities and the differences between V2X and where each regions are going towards. And you'll see, for example, in China, a lot of the emphasis is on traffic congestion, right? Where you have human urban populations, very densely, for example, Shanghai, where I lived for a couple of years, working with some large OEMs over there. Also on the automation side, right, in China, there's a various multiple devices of ITS. And then obviously in both regions, there's an emphasis on traffic safety. And then you see in the US, what I've noticed is there's a lot of discussions on smart highways because of how the interstates highways have developed. And there's also a big emphasis on communities, more so than perhaps the China region, where you're talking about the elderly, the disabled, etc., where you have a larger population driving versus taking public transit, right? And so there's a very distinct, you could say, infrastructure as well as goals differences between the two regions. Next slide, please. And so this is a quick overview of our activities and deployments. You can see we have about 3 larger deployments in China, and we have a couple in the U.S., and we're rapidly expanding in North America, rapidly expanding our deployments in the U.S. But the biggest thing in this side is where there's a big deployment in 5G, and you can see that on the right, especially in Suzhou, where ITS World Congress will be held. I believe it's 2023 now, as well as also awarded the national test beds, which are the National Intelligent Connected Vehicle Demonstration Zones. And then you also have some larger province initiatives, highways, etc. Next slide, please. And this I gave a little bit of, how I was talking about our products and solutions follow a lot of what, the industry and the certification and the standards have developed. This is a kind of timeline, and a lot of the China side really started with the U.S., right? And the U.S. was really the founder of this band and this ITS spectrum. And you could see as time went on, there was a significant increase in the number of standards and certifications on the China side as it related to the network side. And I didn't list all, there's a bunch that I've included. I'm sure other panels will add more input into this, but I've included some basic ones, right? And you'll see that our products also meet some of those concerns, right? And the most recent one, next slide, please, is what we're seeing on the network side, which is what you see on here is our products and offerings and solutions. On the lower layer, we're saying we have the physical hardware and the software. We have an SDK, smartphone apps, etc. And on the top layer, you have the cloud, where we have monitoring systems, etc., platforms, optimizations, etc., data analysis. And in the middle, what we're talking about is really on the edge computing, and really providing a low latency environment and improving the computational abilities of the devices on the edge. And so that we're seeing a lot of deployments and standards going towards this direction. And I see that's also where the differences between the two regions exist, is there's in the past, right, with the US, it's been mainly DSRC, and in China from the get-go has been CV2X. And so now there are very different paths. China is moving on towards the network latency, and that's that's where you see where our product offerings are going. Next slide. I think that's the final. Yep, and here's my contact information. And I hope, look forward to collaborating, right? This is a picture of our team literally standing on each other's shoulders to put up our devices, and my contact information is below. Thank you, look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Charlie. And now we'll hear from Mr. Lee Shoon, who's Senior Manager of the Smart Highway R&D Division of the Korea Expressway Corps. So Lee Shoon, you are next up.
Yeah, good morning, good evening, everyone. I'm Shoon Lee from Korea Expressway Corporation, and it's a great honor to give a presentation in front of all of you. And actually, the KEC has been conducting CITES pilot project from 2014 on behalf of the Korean Ministry of Transportation, which is MOLIT, with Korea Transportation Institute and also into ITS Korea. And I've been involved in the project from the beginning. So at this time, I'm going to talk about the present status and the future plan of CITES projects in Korea. Next slide, please. Actually, in 2013, the Korea government established the CITES master plan, the first CITES master plan, and at that time, we expected that until 2020, we can deploy the 68% of expressway deployment, but it has been delayed because of many reasons, and also include the debate between the V2X technology, and also then 2014 we started the CITES pilot project phase 1, which is I'm involved, and then another 3 more pilot project begun at 2017 to 2018, and the deployment of the phase 2 pilot has been done, and it is on the operational stage. And end of last year, we added 2 more CITES pilot projects, which is in Gwangju City and Ulsan City. And also this year, the July, the Korean government, the President Moon Jae-in, he announced the Korean New Deal initiative, and in that in the plan, it has the CITES infra deployment on 100 of CITES infrastructure deployment until 2025 on the expressway and main arterial roads. And next slide, please. Yeah, this is the total overall the project status of current pilot project progress. And the first pilot project was done in Daejun and Sejong City, and it includes 95 RSUs and 3,000 OBUs. And another 3 pilot was added until last year, and it is on the expressway of Seoul metropolitan area and also Seoul City and Jeju Island. And another 2 pilot project was started end of last year. Yeah, and so the total RSU, which is installed in Korean Peninsula, is about 600, and the OBU will be about 12,900. Next slide, please. This is the first size pilot project, and it started 2014, as I told you, and it stage 1 period will end 2017, and we developed 15 initial CITES services, and we developed many standard and systems, and then the stage 2 was stage 2 started 2018. So at that stage, we developed another technical standard and device certification system and legal system. Yeah, and next slide, please. And also, from 2019 to 2020, we conducted the V2X-SCMS PoC project with another 3 pilot cities. So we developed the PoC system, and we operate the PoC systems, and also it includes the development of legal system, and also we are developing the governance model of the CITES, V2X-SCMS, of the national V2X-SCMS, and also we are developing standard and certification processes. And until this year, we will make the plan for the national SCMS systems. So we are developing the laws and rules for that, and from until 2022, we will launch the national SCMS in Korea. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, as I mentioned, there was 3 pilots started in 2018. It was on the Expressway and Seoul cities and Jeju Island, and it is basically based on the first sensitive pilot project which I involved in. Yeah, and it is conducted by the local transportation agencies. And next slide, please. Yeah, end of the last year, we added 2 more census pilot, and these 2 pilot is the end of the pilot projects, and we will conduct this project until next year. And then next slide, please. Yeah, until this year, we are aiming to complete the foundation for nationwide deployment of CITES projects. So we will begin the national rollout project from next year. So yeah, so we are making a lot of administrative rules, and it includes several technical specifications and performance evaluation rules for CITES infrastructure. And so we will complete the foundation this year, and we will start the national rollout project from 2021. And next slide, please. And this is the end of my presentation, and also Korean government, they announced Korean New Deal initiative plan in July of this year, and it includes a nationwide SATIS deployment plan, and it says that until 2025 we will deploy all expressway and major road infrastructure, SATIS infrastructure, and it will start in metropolitan area like Seoul and Busan city, and also we deploy the SATIS infrastructure on the road which has more than 4 lanes all over the country. Yeah. So I think the Korean CITES project begin this next year. So there are a lot of activities, and then next year we will start another CITES pilot project for the CITES center systems and cloud systems. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. This is my end of my presentation.
Thank you very much. Well, that's great. That's very informative. I think what we've seen with our first two presenters is, their regions have a propensity for action and just getting going and deploying. So that's great. Next up, we've got Parikh from he's the Global Business Development Manager at SGS. So without further ado, Parthiv, why don't you go ahead and tell us about your company and your view on testing in Asia.
Sure. Thank you to my fellow colleagues and everyone for joining, and to OMNIAIR for this opportunity to share a little bit on the APAC region. My presentation will focus, more on the China side. A little bit about the company that I work for. Some people may already know about SGS, but it is one of the largest testing, inspection, and certification company with more than 140 years of history and 89,000 employees spread across 2,600 offices now in the world. We work in 11 different kind of global industries, such as consumer goods and retail, transportation, agriculture, energy, and several others. In the electrical and electronics department that I work for, we offer RF, EMC, safety, battery type approvals for several wireless technologies, including everything from short range to long range, 2G, 3G. Also, I mean, some of you might be surprised, but that's still in existence, and 5G since the last year. And we are proud to be an OMNIAIR authorized test lab. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the focus is on China for this particular segment. It's a big country with a lot of different agencies and industry associations, so it's very easy to get lost actually. So if you try to find information, it's not that easy unless you are aware of who does what in China. So I'm listing a few important ones. I won't spend too much time, but just wanted to give a brief to the attendees so that they know where they can look for a little bit more information. So for example, the IMT 2000 5G promotion group and the China SAE are the organizations that have several working groups creating specifications for different layers and functionalities of V2X. The CAICT is actually a subordinate to the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, MIIT. A lot of people working in China would certainly know that. And it's a very important player in all aspects of China's telecommunications. So some of you might recognize by its older name, it was also called, and it's still called, Chinese Academy of Telecommunication Research, the CATR. The CAICV, on the other hand, was created to promote industry, of the intelligent and connected vehicles. More on the technology development, coordination activities in the industry, and also strengthen international exchange and cooperation. The SRRC is one of the regulatory authority, so that manages the spectrum and the frequency allocation and such. CSAE, everybody knows, it's similar to the SAE that we have here. And the last one, the CCSA, or the China Communication Standards Association, carries out standardization activities in the ICT field and such. So the table that you see here are some of the specifications that are being worked on by IMT 2020 related to functional, performance, application, as well as the other 4 layers from physical to security, which are now part of the CCSA standards, some of which actually became active as of July 2020. Next slide. This slide shows the different LTE V2X specifications based on the categories and the respective organizations. So it's a good reference to have when you want to look for certain specifications which are implemented or not. So the air interface, network layer, message layer, and security have already been formulated, and the application standards are continue to evolve with the industry development. Next slide. So the China regulatory standard for CV2X refers to the SRRC MIIT 2018-203 version, applicable to CV2X for PC-PHY only devices. Right now, it's based off the 3GPP spec 36521-1, and includes the test cases that you see below. The role of SRRC is similar to what we have, familiar with FCC in the US. There is no third-party certification requirement. Currently, it's carried out by government-sponsored organizations as of now. Next slide. Okay. So this slide shows the Internet of Vehicle Pilot Zone progress map. As you can see, there are currently 11 cities which are part of the plan. This slide is a slightly older slide, so there are a few more cities actually which are also created now and active, like Shanghai, Changshu, and probably a couple of more. Maybe the infrastructure construction that they are currently in progress for demonstration purposes will they'll transition that to large scale pilot deployments. Next slide. Yeah, so similar to the 2019 activity that was also carried out this year, there is a large scale test activity which is planned in Shanghai pretty much next month from October 27 to 29. It has a better improved roadside environment, smart signals, and other facilities, along with scenarios for vehicle road coordination and such. It's hosted jointly by the IMT 2020, CICV, CSA, and I think I forget Shanghai International, some automotive city group. Sorry, for the name, a long name. So this activity has been going on in the background for several months, and they've been doing the conformance interop testing in closed site and such. It'll provide a large-scale environment, 100 to 200 OBUs, across straight roads, cross sections, equipped with PC-PHY modules. It'll support communication performance testing, application function testing, and such. Also, it will combine with the LTE V2X security system test and verifications. In addition, actually, Charlie also mentioned, something about the MEC, the multi-edge cloud testbed that are also being deployed with the LTE V2X scenarios, the architecture, and there are around 10 released testbeds for this activity. So I think that is all I have for the update on China. Thank you, everybody. And thanks, Paul. Kate, on to the next one. I hope I made good time.
All right, there you go. Well, thank you very much for that. I think it's interesting to note the activities that are happening from our first 3 speakers, and that there's an awful lot of actual proof of concepts or test grounds happening with field testing and things. So that's great on these early deployments. So our last speaker before we enter the panel session will be JaeKun, and I apologize if I have mispronounced your name. He is Assistant Manager of the Standard Planning Team for ITS Korea. So I'll let you go ahead and start your segment of the presentation.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I think your slide's trying to get up though right now.
Apologies for the delay. There were some images that were not coming through. I'm just reloading.
Okay. Excellent.
Thanks again, Paul. I'm JaeKun from the standard planning team for ITS Korea and working for the CITS standardization and certification program in Korea. Thank you first to Jason Conley and all the OMNIA staffs regarding to give a chance to join in this event. ITS Korea is next, please. ITS Korea established in 2 decades ago. So far, we contributed to development of regarding field through research, policy consultation, and performance evaluation of ITS and do various business activity support in this industry, especially in V2X area called CITS. Center for Standardization has 3 divisions with performance test and certification team, and standard certification team and standard planning team. Each team has put their role on testing, managing certification program, and organize regulations. Next, please. Last years ago, the cooperative automated driving industry consortium called Parikh was founded by Mollit and industrial stakeholders for sharing V2X issues and discussing industrial trends. It is composed from government and major companies like Hyundai, Samsung, and various device makers. ITS Korea is the administrator of subcommittee for CITS communication. So in this role, we have planned to hold a K-flow test and prepare certification programs. Next, please. From the CADIC steering committee management, accreditation board designated the certification authority. ITS Korea has got the title in early this month, and now we are planning to authorize test lab for V2X testing. Next, please. This slide is for a certification procedure for the V2X device like onboard unit and RSU, roadside unit. Test items are composed of V2X communication, cybersecurity, and application called V2X service test cases. V2X communication test cases are following the OMNIA certification program and application test plan to validate the conformance of the V2X safety service or application in the local area. Next, please. This is domestic V2X or the group standard environment from ITS Korea. We are planning for the 6th part of requirement with V2X service using messages and test requirement and managing identifiers. Yeah, next, please. We have had K-flow test and technical workshop every twice a year since 2 years ago. Similar to the OMNIA flow test and Edge flow test in Europe, the K-flow test program is composed of V2X conformance testing and technical workshop. This event can help domestic device makers to prepare the certification and enhance their device performances. Yeah, done.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, I
That
just
was,
have a few minutes, so yeah. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And your contact information is there. Well, thank you, everybody. I think that was really good, and it gave us kind of a quick update as to the way your companies are operating, or your organizations, and your local environment. I thought I'd start off with some just a quick sort of a high-level question to each of you, which is, the focus of V2X in your area. V2X can be used for safety. It can be used for traffic management. It can be used for all sorts of things. There's thousands of possible applications. But I'm going to go through, and I'd like each of you to say just a quick sentence or two about how you view V2X's main utilization in your country or region, which is it primarily focused on safety, or is it primarily focused on traffic management, or something else? What is the tolling? There's all sorts of things it's used for. I thought I'd start off with Mr. Lee Shoon and say, what is the primary use of, or the most important use of V2X in China?
Yeah, okay. In Korea, there was a lot of pilot project which is ongoing and also has been done. And in that pilot project, there are several services applications, and it includes safety application and also traffic management application and so on. So I think at this moment, the project is conducted by the public side, not, private side. So every project is conducted by the local government or traffic management company. So they are focusing on the V2I services. So the V2I services tend to be focused on traffic management. So, but also, I think the most important service is coming from the V2B communication. So that V2B communication service have to be, focus on the safety services. So at this moment, we are developing a lot of V2B, safety service and traffic management service. But in the first day one period, I think the most benefit is coming from the traffic management, and also we can give the road status, like work zone area or some car accident, and also we can give information via RSU to the vehicle, like end of the queue, or the kind of information also involved in the safety. But in the first stage, which is the penetration rate is low, so we can focus on traffic management, and then the penetration ratio is going up with that, and so we can fulfill the safety purpose of the V2X communication service. Yeah, that's my opinion.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That's great. So I think we've got a Korean focus on traffic management and safety with infrastructure in the loop. So that's interesting. Charlie, I think maybe you can give us a little bit of snapshot on what you're seeing.
So it's an interesting question, and I always like putting up that comparison table, right? But I like to equate it to some of the, just looking at a little bit of the past. So if you look at it, right, they had a big investment in ITS devices, non-V2X, talking about camera-based, speed-based cameras, etc., and tickets, and getting sent to your door, and etc., and huge amount of geometric sensors, etc., on the ground. Host of new pedestrian crosswalk, and all active traffic control systems, right? So, but for V2X, it seems a lot of that is going along that trend. So I would say my answer to that is hard to pick one, right? But I would say my answer to that is commercial applications of the network. And that's then really utilizing not only the devices, but a live connection to the devices to then influence the whole traffic network, let's say.
Interesting. So, it's interesting because in the U.S., of course, the primary emphasis was safety, and both of you have sort of talked about other things first. Parthiv, what's your view?
Yeah, certainly. I agree with all of them. So, if you see historically, right, like China, really grew at a rapid pace, right? And so there is, a lot of urbanization, the incomes, higher incomes, boom in transportation infrastructure and such. So now, if you see the data, it is one of the world's largest producer and consumer of passenger vehicles, which brings up the big problem of congestion, parking, traffic efficiency, and such, right? So, using all the things that Charlie mentioned, the focus, I also believe for V2X in China is, more really to ease congestion and improve traffic efficiency and throughput. And certainly, last but not the least, safety is always going to be, one of the concerns. But I don't think that's like the biggest concern in China compared to congestion and traffic.
Okay, interesting. It's once again, it's kind of a different thing, and I think one of the reasons I asked the questions, I think it's important to highlight that's a big difference from the U.S. and I think the European view, which is kind of more safety based. So the follow-on to that maybe is I'll ask JaeKun how does that influence? Given that in Korea, your focus is more on traffic management than it is on safety, and you're keeping infrastructure in the loop, as Shoon was saying. So, how does that influence your testing? Is there because you've got a lot of commercial things, you've got all sorts of stuff that comes into play. To contrast that in the U.S., a lot of our testing is done vehicle to vehicle, right? And we're testing interception rates and a bunch of other things, but it's vehicle to vehicle testing, and we're concerned about congestion and other things when there's a lot of cars. But in your guys' case, you've got this big infrastructure component, and I'm wondering how that affects your concept of testing and deployment.
Actually, according to the testing, the domestic certification program has a test item with V2X safety application test cases. That cases are being developed now. In the other case, regarding radio and protocols are following Omnia performance testing regulation, and this application testing, like V2X service, are put their purpose on providing complete safety services around the domestic area to using certification devices. In Korea, in the Korea system, the tolling system is also very important in our road condition. The domestic condition is the 2-decade PCS service using DSRC communication has been operated on the public expressway managed by Korea Expressway Corporation. Also recently, in some cases, like using the private invest road, the charging split is needed. So smart tolling system also have been constructed. So so far, we should following that system. We are adopt that testing program. So we are on the develop now. Okay.
So I think you've got a lot of practical experience in Korea, and I think that probably is informing your testing. So Parthiv, as a vendor of testing, when you've got this big focus on more of a commercial and a traffic management than you do once again on vehicle-to-vehicle safety, how does that affect your guys' approach to test and deployment? Do you have to go with more static facilities, or what are some of the implications?
Right. So currently we are seeing a lot of focus on the HMI interface, the functional safety, the interaction of the information actually, and the messaging, right? And CV2X conformance certainly is one of the big item there. The issue that there is a lot of these are still in the draft versions, right? So for the car OEMs or the tier ones, we work closely to ensure that in the development stages, right, that they're able to comply with the technical requirements. The reason being, there is no certification program sort of for the third parties, right? So as a for-profit third party test labs, right, we cannot really test. Unless you're the government lab. So that's where the testing is going currently. But what we are helping actually our clients is really in the initial phases to get ready for it, right? So that not to waste time, because as we can see, there was the huge plug fests actually, and the IOVs deployments that are going on there, right? So that's how we are actually seeing the customers coming to us for the help in these kind of scenarios.
So to kind of sum up, then you're seeing much more of the basic functionality link, get the integrity of the connection first, and test that, and then the whole infrastructure piece has to be
right.
validated
Just because the standards are in the draft stages, right? So a lot of different vendors, right, have certain different parameters at the message layer, right? And now when you have to let's say test the interop, right, that whether it's actually going to work on a long road or not, right, with several different RSU vendors or the deployment, right? So that's one of the things that customers are asking us to verify, whether the messaging is for what it's supposed to be, or what is the messaging, what are we seeing out there.
Yeah, we have, just an aside, our company has developed a China stack for V2X and has participated in both of the CAICT plug fests and gotten recertified each time, but it's always a lot of work. We're putting huge energy into moving along with the draft standards and everything, so I can understand that. Let me kind of shift gears just a little bit. So I think everybody kind of mentioned MEC as part of the traffic, the V2X setup and architecture. And in the past, that wasn't the case, right? If we go back even 4 or 5 years ago, MEC was an idea, but people weren't considering talking a lot about deploying it in the V2X infrastructure. So I guess I'll ask Mr. Lee Shoon a little bit about what are your views about the role that MEC's playing in your layout and the way that you plan on testing, or what implications MEC has for test for you, since it's going to become part of the infrastructure.
So you mean the MEC mobile edge computing infrastructure?
Yes.
So I think the status or the cooperative driving application have to meet the latency requirement. So to reduce the latency of the service, we have to give some MEC edge computing services. So we are developing several edge computing services and also infrastructure on the road. So but
okay,
as you know, the 5G, their goal is about the MEC, a lot of MEC, but it hasn't been fully deployed these days yet. Sorry. So I think there have to be some more investment or money or the manpower to the kind of to develop the kind of technology. So
I think I agree. Our company's participated in a couple of MEC interoperability events to try to see how we would deploy that kind of capability in 5G, and it's interesting that they actually recognize that interoperability between the different mobile carriers, like in our particular case, it was a Deutsche Telekom and Vodafone event, that now instead of just having to have the phones work across different network providers, you also now have to have compatible mobile edge computing or multi-edge access computing, because of the fact that a car will transition through different zones, right? And if we're going to rely on that, so I don't know, Charlie, you also mentioned MEC. I think, do you have some thoughts about how that's going to affect things in China? Because there you have a very large country with a lot of individual regional control by the big cities and metropolises and things.
Yeah, no, I like to equate also from a conceptual point. I like to equate it to like different silos, right? You have a traffic silo, an automotive silo, etc. But in this sense, you know, there's the side of where you're trying to meet the direct needs of the driver and making sure that the messages get to the person on time, right? In the few seconds that they're driving. And that said, you know, the results in a lot of latency, but also it's also related to the security side, right? Because the security side, then you're looking at unsigned your signed certificates and etc. And then that if let's say there's a pause, then that pause could multiply and affect the whole thing down and the chain, right? And so that's where I think a big demand from China from these commercial applications of the V2X is really, if you put it down to the heart of it, is utilizing the network, right? And that's what you see a lot of the support in 5G, et cetera, in China. But also, I think, you know, to your question earlier about testing, it is very much region specific, right? In the US, it's mainly been self-certification. In other regions, Europe and China, it's been third party, right? And both have advantages and disadvantages in this sense, right? From the US perspective, yes, it is a lot about safety, but I think it's more about the human factors. It's actually taking the technology and putting it in the hands of the person who's actually going to be benefiting from it from a safety perspective. Whereas if you look at it from China, right, the third party, it's okay, we have all these different devices because we have to cover all these different regions, you know, European, all the, you know, all the different standards, all the different protocols. And you have the huge population with a host of unlicensed, perhaps, devices, right? And so that part requires certification. And that for us as a vendor, right, we want to know what it is, the products we have to make, you know, the specifications we need to meet, right? And that's where you see China did a very rapid thing with when they started doing the interoperability testing with the 4-span and the 3-span, the 3 layers and the 4 layers, where that really set the tone. We're saying, okay, any devices out on the road, you know, from an infrastructure, from the government's perspective, they all must be able to talk to each other. Well, having the ability to talk to each other is one side, but then having the basic brain cloud perhaps to do that is a whole different discussion. I think that's where a lot of the testing and the deployments are going, and that's some of the things that we've done, right? In Wuhan, which is world famous now, and Suzhou also. Those are two pilots we've been looking at MEC, as well as also some highway applications as well.
Okay. Well, I'm going to continue to skip around on some of the different topics here to kind of stir up some questions at the end of our discussion time. So, JaeKun, I'm going to ask you the next question, which is, you know, we've talked about some of the regional differences between countries and sections, and also, you know, the difference between maybe certifying for infrastructure and keeping infrastructure in the loop versus vehicle to vehicle. And I guess what I'm wondering is, how do you, it seems like Korea has a pretty tight control over national standards and things. That's what I'm getting out of your presentation and Lee Shoon's, is that you have a pretty homogeneous sort of standard across the whole country. But in the rest of the world, maybe not so much. So I guess what I'm wondering is, how do you view the Korean standard, and how do you interact with the Korean standard versus all the surrounding countries, since Korea is, as you mentioned earlier, a net exporter of vehicles?
About the different view of other regions, those American certification program is progressing with private like Omnia management that Korea has been doing with the cooperation between public and industrial stakeholders. In this research, as mentioned earlier, the Parikh has been funded with sub-working groups. This committee has discussed and decided on the necessary regulation, system, and technical issues. Basically, we are following the international standard a lot. So our group standard also following that standard. So because our car makers and device makers also wanted to following that international standard because they should sell their device to abroad. So we are following their opinion, and we are basically our certification program are following that regulation. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to pause here for just a moment. And Kate, I'm believing that we have a way for the audience to send in questions.
Yes, if our audience members have any questions, there is a Q&A option. So just enter your questions.
All right. If we have some questions now, then I was going to take a little bit of a break and see if we could start answering some of those. But if not, I'll just continue to go through the panel. So sounds like there's no questions. Okay. Okay, so let me kind of talk a little bit about deployment, the mechanics of deployment. So, Mr. Lee Shoon, in Korea, how does deployment actually happen? You know, and the reason I ask this at a very low level, you know, from our point of view, do you have like a whole system of government lets out the contracts, or COEX in this case might you know, Korean Expressway Corporation might send out a contract to get V2X or you know, an ITS infrastructure put in, and then do you use general contractors? You know, who are the different players? Are there big contracting companies in Korea that do this, and then they have subcontractors and other things? How is the whole deal made? Because there's technology involved. It's a little different than just making a road, right? You have to have technology and infrastructure from a network standpoint. And maybe you could just talk a little bit about how the actual contracts get fulfilled.
Okay. Yeah, you're right. There are several projects, and it's just been done by the local government agencies, traffic agencies, and the fund is coming from the national fund. It is 40% of the budget, and the 60% of the budget is coming from the local government, and then the local government they contract with the system integration company like Korean telecommunication company or SK Telecom, and also there is DB telecommunication company is the main contractor, and we call it SI, the system integrator, and then they have the subcontractors like the device manufacturer or the software development country for center programs, and also there are a lot of additional supplementary the ITS system like road sensors, and there are another subcontractors. So we, yeah, our project is going like that way. Yeah.
Okay. So Charlie, why don't maybe you can kind of contrast that, if there's a contrast with China. How, you know, your company sells equipment in China, so presumably, you know, you would is there a similar structure?
So I've been doing a lot of this and learning a lot about this, and the differences between the North America, let's say, because we're also in Canada, right? Can't forget about Canada. Between this and China, and it seems that like what Lee Shoon was saying was the system integrator perhaps is a different type of system integrator than what North America thinks. And that's good, again, could be because of the different silos, but also could be because, you know, the U.S. is a market economy. But it does seem that more of the network and the vendors play a role in that contractor or integrator role alongside the government than perhaps a urban planner or designer, or, well, testing companies and research companies that are in China are also play some of that role, right? the research institutes. But it's a little bit different because I see a lot in the North America. A lot of that is urban planners and developers, economic developers, etc. I don't know about yet.
So it's interesting. It sounds like in both countries there's a much bigger role of what we would call the network operator, the mobile network operator, like the cellular phone company. Essentially, is the one who's the system integrator. In the U.S., a lot of times the system integrator may be a traditional construction general contractor, like a Parsons Corporation or general engineering company. So that is interesting. Parthiv, what do you see? Your company goes around to a bunch of different regions. How do you guys deal with the different systems for bidding and deployment?
Yeah, so actually, I'm not really too familiar with the deployment. Actually, in different country and regions, as more of a inspection agency. We do inspections actually, but that's that could be more safety or standard related inspections, or factory kind of inspections, or it could be construction, bridges, and deployment kind of inspections. But the segment of the company that I work for is more focused on the device testing rather than deployment. So I need to find out on that. That's some homework for me.
All right, there you go. Well, JaeKun, you probably have also an opinion about how the actual deployment happens. What are the mechanics of deployment from your visibility in the ITS organization?
Actually, the biggest hurdle in our region is hard to decide the main communication technology between DSRC and V2X. Similar global issues, our region also has been arguing to discussion the main technology. So the V2X deployment strategy and service provision both are delayed in conclusion. Recently, same with North America, the two government departments regarding V2X. One side is for infrastructure, like Moderator, and the other is for frequency management, argues for using the 5.9 bandwidth. On the other operator side, the providing public safety services, they wanna use verified communication technology with technology maturity for 10 years more. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting that the debate between the different radio standards is still alive outside of China. I think when our company was founded back in 2008, I don't think the founder Ravi Pavala had any concept that we'd be still talking about which radio to choose here in 2020. but here it is, still happening. I think another question that comes out of this is maybe kind of going back to another high-level question. For each of you, is test or development, or deployment rather, is test or deployment a bigger hurdle in your region? And maybe we'll start off with Lee Shoon again. What is it? Is it testing a bigger deal, or is deployment a bigger issue?
Okay. I think the two issues is involved in each other, so we cannot say just one thing for that. For the deployment, we have to how can I say, evaluate the performance of the devices or services. So we have to have a test procedure and test regulation before the deployment. So Korean government and we are developing a lot of performance evaluation rules for this year, and so there are a lot of service or device performance specification. We are making the kind of things. So I think the first thing we have to we have to make some the kind of specification or regulation for the testing, and then actually the local government, they want to, without the kind of rules, they cannot start the deployment project. So I think this the step of the project.
All right.
my
So
opinion.
it's kind of like you're saying, chicken before the egg. You have to be able to test before you can deploy. I think. So Parthiv, you're in the test business in China, and China's already decided on C-V2X instead of having any kind of debate between DSRC and C-V2X. So does that simplify things? Does that mean that test is a little more leverageable, or is it just still the same thing? You have a whole bunch of work to do before you can get to deployment.
Yeah. Currently, it seems there have been a lot of these pilots and deployments, right, in China. So deployment is not sort of a big concern. It's a more development policy at the top high level of the government, and they're pushing it, in the technical test standards, and establishing policies for different cities, and they're providing the support. But as far as the testing goes, right, for that, because the standards are still, some of the standards are not even out there, right? Some of the standards don't even are not even in the draft stages, right? So yes, high level what we call testing and interop events are being carried out, right? But till you actually go down in the specs and have a certification scheme, right? And if it's only going to be the government labs that are going to be testing it, I'm not sure of the throughput thereof, right? So what we are hoping for is rather that eventually third-party testing for these standards actually open up to accelerate and help with the deployment efforts rather. So that's my perspective.
So actually I'm going to go to Charlie now, because like in China, one of the things our company has noticed is that deployment and development, deployment, and testing all seem to kind of happen in parallel. And is that a good way to put that? Anyway, so I guess what is your view as to how, in particular, the C-V2X choice is influencing that? Because I noticed in your pictures, you're deploying discrete RSUs. Do you view that as becoming part of the cellular infrastructure in the future, or do you think there will always be separate RSUs that need to be tested? Anyway, I'm wondering how that all affects, the test and deployment picture there.
So we are talking a lot with tier ones and OEMs in China. We would love to talk for some in North America, around the world. We're also considering Europe. So we are looking at that. So on the vehicle side, I won't get, but from the infrastructure side, we do believe that the RSUs will get, I don't want to say embedded, but part of the, whether it be the small cells or the nodes, right, or the cell stations, etc. We do believe that, and we have some development in that area. But you're right. It really happens in parallel. And we see opportunities where governments will say, this is what we want to do, and we want it done in a month. And it's rapid. Immediately you go through it. It's literally like if you were to travel to China right now, right? You go one step after another and one stop, and you won't stop until you're at the end. And the end for China is interoperability, it seems, and the network, whether it can actually handle things on the road. But I think in China, the biggest difference, I think this is an advantage of the US regions, is that for North America, you really do get into the technical functionality of it, right? In China, I think they have maybe in their mindset of a balance between letting the technology flourish and having the little mishaps and etc., which could result in a couple, so accidents and fatalities, etc. But that won't influence the larger initiative, and so that's where I think China goes with deploying it. But let's be very clear. I don't think anybody has gotten onto a mass deployment stage around the world, right? And that's the key thing that I think a lot of people are looking at now, is how do we actually get them on the road with a large number of vehicles that are live, not in a pilot or not in a geofenced area, not alongside autonomous vehicles, but traditional vehicles being retrofitted, let's say.
JaeKun, I think you've heard the other guys talking about this whole the deployment and the testing and some of the issues that have come up. And I think one of the things that Charlie just mentioned is the challenge of deploying a lot of nodes in order to reach saturation and have this truly be the system that we want it to be. And I guess from your point of view, how are you progressing along on that challenge in Korea, and how do you see that pushing forward, especially since you mentioned earlier that there's still a little bit of challenge on DSRC versus CV2X? How do you see that proceeding?
In my position, I just keep a neutral position in my case. Actually, I just talk about the other side, just neutral position. We should look at the characteristic of each project. In the case of infrastructure for providing V2X service, it has been progressed by the public. And deployment strategy for onboard unit also closely involved with the public and private industry. Naturally, the testing and certification program is being managed with the industrial committee like Parikh. Basically, since we start to prepare V2X certification program, we always have discussed and confirmed the main subject. I think this preparation with the agreement can be the ground, the base can be the ground and base, and this certification will be the right to join the public V2X project. But I know the main communication, the decide to the main communication technology is really important. But in our regions, the decisions are continuously delayed in a few years. So so many car makers and device makers are wanted to they say we are not programmed to make anything, just decided. So yeah, we and the government are trying to decision and take a test again, and we analyze the result about that to communication technology. So I personally I want to decide it immediately. Yeah.
I think we all do. This is the V2X is, I think, the biggest revolution in transportation that we've been all anxious to have happen, and maybe 2021 will be the year. So I think we have now run down towards the end of our time, and I think I want to thank everybody for participating in our panel session. I wish we even had a lot more time to go ahead and get through more questions. I hope it's been enjoyable for our audience, and I'm taking it that since I didn't see any flags from Kate, we didn't have any last questions or anything to answer. Is that correct, Kate?
That is correct.
Okay. So with that, once again, I want to thank all of our panelists. You had excellent information, I think, for everyone. I hope everyone in the audience was able to benefit from that. I know that I wrote down a few notes for myself, and our company's invested heavily in doing business in both China and Korea, and I can thoroughly attest that those areas have moved ahead faster than the rest of the world, and we look forward to that continued leadership. So thank you for giving us your insights today, and I hope you have a good rest of the conference and the Plug Fest this week. So thank you very much, and once again, the contact information for all of our panelists is available in the presentations should you have some questions from the audience later. So thanks again, and on to our next session, which, don't forget, stay with us, because the next session after this is Randy Roebuck leading the session on, what is he on?
Oh, the technical session, yeah.
Testing overview, yeah. Okay. So
yeah, I have one last question.
Testing overview.
Can I
right,
ask a last question?
Okay.
Who's ready for beer?
I know I am.
All
But here
right.
we are. A little hard to do virtually.
All right.
So, at any rate, thanks again, everybody.
All right. Thank
Okay.
you. Bye-bye.
Right, bye.